Being creative is never convenient. Hey everybody! I made a pair of shoes! I'm so excited. I just finished these yesterday, and today's video will be taking you along for the journey of making these. And it was quite the journey, although I am getting a little bit better at avoiding horrible pitfalls in my shoemaking process. But nonetheless, making shoes is very much a labor of love, and I still cannot ever fully explain why I'm doing it other than it just feels like it's right and like I'm meant to be doing it. So that's what this video will be about. And I'll also just be talking to you throughout this video about some helpful creative philosophies that I hope will be inspiring to you whether or not you ever plan on making shoes. These shoes were inspired by 1920s-ish shoe design, and they were sort of made in a similar way to my Downton Abbey shoes, except that I learned from my Downton Abbey shoemaking adventure that I'm really not a high heels sort of person, and so these just have a very simple, what they would have called a mannish style in the 1920s. It has a very sort of more masculine shape of heel especially, but that's just the type of shoe person I am at this time in my life. As much as I love the higher, more curvy heels. I mean, I guess I could have done a more curvy heel of this height, but I just didn't feel like it. I wanted a more straight heel. So anyways, let's jump into the shoemaking process. So telling you the story of these shoes is actually very bittersweet to me because these shoes were originally dreamt up and patterned out by me shortly before what became a very large move for our family. But at the time, I wasn't aware of it. I had just had a baby. She was maybe 1 or 2 months old at the time when I started patterning these shoes, and I just was really itching to make a pair of shoes. And that is when I patterned them based on these inspiration shoes, particularly the way the straps are shaped, but with more of a 1920s mannish heel, as they would call it, because I wanted something a bit lower so that I could incorporate my handmade shoes into my daily wardrobe, whereas my previous Downton Abbey shoes hadn't been seeing a lot of use yet due to their high heels. Then moving happened, and these shoes kind of got lost amidst the shuffle, until after we'd been settled in here for about a month and I had my lovely new studio space, and that is when I really got down to making these shoes. So I have a lot of great memories of sewing together these shoes in my quiet studio in the mornings while listening to podcasts, having some time by myself or just with the baby, and yeah, it was really nice. So many times through posting photos and videos of projects that I have made online, I will get the enthusiastic and kind comments that I have a talent or I'm gifted in some way. While I certainly appreciate the sentiment behind these comments, I actually don't think I'm particularly gifted. And while I may have what some perceive to be a talent, to me the word talent implies something that you were just kind of magically granted at birth. But I experienced the skills that I have learned to do and that I am very much still learning to do as being something that I've had to work at very hard. While I have certainly been born with a large desire to pursue my creative hobbies, and I generally do give myself the permission to follow these creative urges, the things that I have learned to do and the things that I have learned to make have not come easily. They have come through many, many hours of struggle and devotion and failure and continuing to try and continuing to be disillusioned by the things that I make and then trying to do better the next time. And shoemaking is no exception. Okay, so after I've cut out all the pieces for the uppers, the first step is to skive the edges with a nice sharp knife. Skiving is simply where we scrape the edges of the uppers thinner, especially because all of these edges are going to be folded under, and in order for this to be a smooth and streamlined fold under, they need to be skived, even though I am already working with very thin leather. And I'm just cutting out some cotton canvas for the lining of these shoes. Cotton twill is what you actually see most often historically, and I would like to get some cotton twill for my next pair, but this time the cotton canvas was just fine. That's another thing I learned during this project is just with moving and having a relatively new baby, I made a lot of sort of like shortcuts and compromises just in order to prioritize getting the project done rather than getting it done perfectly per se. I'd like to get more into the habit of getting here earlier, so I'm going to be working on my shoemaking project. So yesterday I did the first bit of stitching, the top stitching for the straps of the uppers, and I'm going to be working more on closing the uppers and using my beloved Adler machine to do so. It's just such a joy to work with, and I'm actually really excited. So let's go. Okay, so now that the uppers are getting stitched together, it's time to apply the lining to the outer part of the uppers, and I'm doing this with double-sided shoemaking tape, lightly hammering it in place. You can see that I did also add a matching leather facing to the upper edge of this lining. That's just to make it a little more structured, but also for looks as well. Now I forgot to add this reinforcement tape. This is like a canvas tape that you lay over the back seam and any other areas of the shoe uppers that you would like to be reinforced for strength. Okay, so now it's time to get those straps added into the uppers. So the first step is trimming the edge of that underlining of these straps because they were cut to be a little wider than they needed to be. So now that they're stitched on, I am just carefully using my embroidery scissors to trim those. The next time I do this, I'm going to use a pair of curved scissors, which I have since gotten because yeah, a few mistakes happened with these straight scissors, and curved scissors would make it so much easier. So again, I'm just using the double-sided shoemaking tape to attach these straps in before taking them to the sewing machine. They are going to be attached in the line of top stitching around the top edge of these shoe uppers. And after a few attempts on the machine, I decided to simply hand stitch this buckle on because I didn't have enough fold over strap to be able to access it on the machine. But hand stitching worked just fine with the help of some pliers. Okay, so now it's time to start lasting these shoes. This is the super exciting part. Also, one of the most stressful parts to me is when you're first beginning the lasting process, partly because this is where I have historically had the most significant mess ups in my previous shoemaking projects. But this time, thankfully, nothing too horrific happened. Lasting is really a mixture of art and science. I do have a textbook that gives me some pointers on how to do this, but I also just do a lot by feel, obviously, and sometimes the leather doesn't always cooperate, and you really need to give it a few tries to get it to stretch properly. So now I am lasting and gluing down the lining layer. So the first lasting is done with both layers acting as one, and then later you separately last just the lining in order to get it to be smooth and free of wrinkles. And of course there are going to be wrinkles, but all these wrinkles need to only be on the underside of the shoe. So underneath what's called the feather edge, which is the edge where the side of the shoe last and the shoe meets the sole edge. And so it's okay to have wrinkles under the bottom of the sole, but you don't want them to be on the upper part of the shoe. And any wrinkles that are present are later going to be trimmed down so they're nice and flat. So now I'm working with a heel stiffener. This was made with belly leather that I wet formed over the last time I made my Downton Abbey shoes. I did this lasting the stiffener as one with the body of the shoe, because that's what my shoemaking textbook told me to do, but it was really quite stressful and challenging to do it that way, so I did the preformed method this time. And I'm using my Hirsch Kleber paste, which is just a type of starchy glue, to glue that in place and glue it to the lining and later to the upper as well. So now that it is glued in place, I'm just going in and trimming off all of those bumpy folds of leather on the bottom edge. Getting it a little wet because since it was formed beforehand, it's sitting just a little bit differently than it was then. So I'm just kind of like re-wet forming it a little bit along that bottom edge to make sure it's sitting nice and flush against the bottom of the last. And again, just paring off some of those bulgy folds of leather. One thing I do really need to up-level in my shoemaking is I'm still sort of struggling with keeping knives sharp. I do have a variety of methods on hand for sharpening knives, but it's just something I am struggling with. So yeah, that's something I need to work on. But don't worry, my hands were not in danger, even though sometimes it does look like my fingers are in danger of getting cut. This knife is actually one of my sharper ones. It's called a heel paring knife, and I really enjoy using it. Just making sure that stiffener is nice and formed to the last. And now that it's all glued in place, I'm going with my sandpaper and roughing up the outside. This is to remove the grain side of the leather, which will first of all just help it to be smoother and free of any bumps or irregularities, but also help it to adhere better to the upper layer. And here is the toe puff, which was actually done with a thinner leather. It's the same type of leather that I used for the uppers, just in a different color. And that's all skived and lasted in place around the toe. And now I'm just adhering it with the Hirsch Kleber starchy glue. Now it's time to start lasting the upper leather, so I've just gotten it nice and wet in preparation for that, for the final lasting, in which I want to get all of the wrinkles perfectly smoothed and pulled out so that there are only creases and ridges on the very bottom of the shoe last and none reaching into the top part. While we're on the topic of creativity, I myself taught myself how to sew in a tiny apartment on our coffee table right in our living room with very minimal supplies, no meter stick, no special rulers, no special tools, and that was how I taught myself to sew. Anyone can learn creativity no matter what their circumstances, and everyone has that really creative 5-year-old still deep inside of them. That is the beautiful thing, that even if you feel like you've lost your creativity over time, you can always get it back. That little creative 5-year-old genius living inside of you, they're still there. They're still waiting to be rediscovered and to be given the validation that yes, their ideas are valuable and they have something amazing to offer. Okay, so now that the upper is lasted, I am again using my knife to cut off those ridges and bumps of the wrinkles that were formed. And now I'm just going in with my leather marking pen and roughly marking where the sole and the heel are later going to sit, before going in and rasping off the outer layer of the leather so it will be able to be cemented in more effectively to the sole. I created a leather shank for this pair of shoes. The shank is simply to support the waist and the arch of the foot. And there is the lasted shoe, ready for its sole and heel. Okay, so now I'm cementing on the sole. So a few things have happened here. I've filled in the hollow area with some cork, and I've also added what's called the first rand, which is what you see on the heel. It's a very important foundational layer for the heel. And I'm just applying my contact cement. While I do enjoy working with the water-based contact cements for most of the shoemaking process, I have learned that for cemented shoes, it's best to use the heavy-duty, more fumey stuff for the actual soles. So the act of shoemaking has really taught me patience. Shoemaking, quite frankly, takes a very long time compared to all of the other creative pursuits of mine, like garment making, corset making, bra making, even painting. Shoemaking is the one that takes the longest amount of time, at least for now. So it takes a long time, but what is beautiful about that is how the act of making a single pair of shoes for me captures, like magic, the experiences that I was going through during the time period when they were being made. The flavor, the emotions, the thoughts, the struggles, like a time capsule of sorts. A time capsule that I get to wear at the end. A huge part of creativity is patience. Patience with the process, but mostly patience with ourselves. The patience to allow ourselves to be really bad for a long time before we can begin being good at whatever it is. And again, bad and good are simply objective definitions. Any form of creativity is always good, even if it isn't something amazing to look at. I still don't feel like I am particularly good at shoemaking. This is only my 7th pair of handmade shoes, which isn't a whole lot when it comes to learning such a complex craft. But I am deeply satisfied with the little successes I have had over the now, about 3 years that I have been shoemaking. And the process is now becoming smoother and more predictable for me, which is always a good thing. Sometimes practicing our creativity looks like having supposedly weird ideas and having no idea where they will lead, but simply stepping out on faith anyways. Shoemaking is the clearest example of that for me. I can still remember the day and the time in the afternoon when I first decided that I was going to learn shoemaking. I went from not even believing that shoemaking was possible to do at home to, like that, deciding that actually it was possible after seeing an amazing shoemaker here on YouTube. And not only that it was possible, but I was going to learn to do it. And that's how it all started for me. Now I'm still at the point where it takes me so long to make a pair of shoes that most people who don't feel the passion that I do for it would have no clue why I'm doing this, logically speaking. Now, when it comes to creativity in this day and age of technology, it is so important to refrain from comparing ourselves with other people online who have likely been doing it for much longer than we have. There will always be people who are far better than we are at doing whatever the creative pursuit is. But honestly, that is completely irrelevant, except for maybe looking at these people for inspiration and instruction. But ultimately, creativity is practiced for its own sake, not for the purpose of becoming proficient or some kind of virtuoso. Okay, so after applying that heel lift, I am pegging it in place. This was done for every heel lift, just to make sure that it was all fully, attached as one unit and that no shifting would happen, even though the glue does do a good job on its own. Just making sure the surface is now completely flat before going in and adding our next lift. One of the hardest parts of starting a new hobby is when you have a clear vision in your mind of something you want to create. In my case, like a pair of shoes or a pair of beautiful Victorian lace-up boots, but lacking the experience, tools, or knowledge to be able to bring that vision into physical reality. But trust me, the more you practice something, the closer your real physically created projects will come to those visions in your mind's eye. And that is where the real magic comes in. I still have a bunch of notebooks where I have sketched out ideas for shoes or garments I would like to make, and it is always surreal when I am flipping through these notebooks several months or even a few years later and seeing sketches that I made a long, long time ago and realizing that I actually ended up creating the exact physical garment or pair of shoes or bra or corset that I had sketched out. It is so surreal, and it gives me so much more belief in the power of sketching out our ideas, writing our ideas down, no matter how crazy they seem, and the power that that has in bringing things into physical reality. Okay, so the final step is applying the dyes and waxes that will finish off the appearance of these shoes. So since they are very dark green, almost black, I went for a black heel and a black waist of the shoe, as well as the very edges of the sole were all dyed black as well, before I went in with some black shoe wax sort of polish. Again, being that we've just moved into a new studio and I'm still very much in the phase of getting set up, I did not have the best tools on hand to do this, so I literally was working with one of my kids' paintbrushes to do this because that was all I could find at the time. So these shoes are finished and it's time to remove the lasts. We're not going to talk about that, but that was probably the most painful process of this whole shoemaking adventure, and I really hope to make that process a lot easier the next time. And here are the finished shoes. So I think the problem with people looking at something online that someone else has made and pronouncing that person as gifted or having some sort of innate talent is that it implies that they have something special that most people don't or can't ever have. And I completely disagree with that. Every single person is born with a creative gene, so to speak. In a longitudinal test of creative potential, a NASA study found that of 1,600 4- and 5-year-olds, 98% scored at creative genius level. Now, 5 years later, only 30% of that same group of children scored at the same level. And again, 5 years after that, only 12% of these same children scored as having creative genius. Now, when the same test was administered to adults, it was found that only 2% scored at this creative genius level. So to me, what this tells me is that, again, everyone is born with what we might term a creative gene or just innate creativity. But it seems that throughout life, we are basically squashing people's creativity. And I think this is a big problem in our society, that we've come to believe that creativity is limited to only a few sort of elite people. And this couldn't be further from the truth. Okay, everyone, I really hope you enjoyed coming along with me for this shoemaking adventure, and I really hope I've inspired you to embrace whatever form of creativity is appealing to you, or whatever creative thing that you would love to do but you've been putting off, or telling yourself that you're not good enough or you just don't have enough time. That's what I wanted for this video for you, and I hope I've achieved it. Please let me know in the comments if you're feeling inspired to attempt anything creative, and yeah, I'd love to hear from you. Just give this video a like if you enjoyed it, and share it with anyone who you think may enjoy it, and I'll see you on my next video.